You know, when a government puts up a multi-billion bat building, you kind of expect it to be in pretty good shape.
Yeah, for more than just a few years, right?
Exactly. But that's not quite the story we're looking into today in Thailand.
No, it seems not. We've got this, well, concerning situation around the Thai Parliament building. It's only been in use about 4 years.
4 years, yeah.
And already there's talk of a huge renovation budget, like
Yeah.
956 million baht.
Wow.
So today we're digging into that using a news report that details these concerns and also a really interesting official document.
Which is?
It's the government's own handbook for evaluating outcomes and controlling the value of projects for agencies linked to Parliament.
Okay, so we're trying to understand why this relatively new building needs so much work already.
Exactly. And see how this whole situation stacks up against the government's own rules for getting value for public money.
Right. Let's jump in. There was a press conference, wasn't there? Senator Nantana Nanavaropas.
That's right, back on May 8th, 2025. And yeah, she laid out some pretty alarming issues.
The main one being this huge renovation budget so soon.
That was the core of it, yeah. But she got specific. She mentioned, actual structural problems.
Like what?
Things like leaking walls, collapsed ceilings.
Collapsed ceilings already.
Apparently. And mold growing on columns, issues with the aircon.
Okay, leaking walls, collapsed ceilings. In a building that's basically brand new, it really makes you question the initial build quality, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And here's the kicker, the really interesting part.
Go on.
She pointed out that these problems are happening while the building is still under warranty.
Okay. That changes things, surely.
Should. I mean, it immediately brings up questions about who's responsible, the contractors who did the original job, right?
It's cost, what was it, 22 billion?
For around 22 billion, yeah.
Yeah.
About 666 million US dollars. So if you've got major flaws showing up inside the warranty period,
Then fixing them shouldn't cost the taxpayer more money. It should be on the builders.
that's the logical assumption. So what we're seeing isn't just, minor teething problems.
No, it sounds more fundamental.
It suggests there might be a systemic issue, maybe design, maybe construction, maybe quality control just wasn't there.
That's what I was thinking. I mean, this wasn't some small shed they built. It was a huge investment.
Exactly. And there's another layer here. A separate report we looked at mentions even bigger figures.
Bigger than 956 million.
Yeah, potentially 2.7 billion baht for renovations. And it connects this back to the original project, the Sapaya Sapasathan.
Okay.
And this report, it brings up allegations of, well, corruption and just poor construction right from the start.
How so?
Well, the original budget apparently jumped massively from about 12.3 billion baht to almost 23 billion.
Wow. Nearly double.
And get this, a former anti-corruption committee member has supposedly filed 56 separate cases related to that original construction.
56. Okay, that definitely signals something wasn't right with the first project.
You'd think so.
Yeah.
And this second report suggests a maybe cynical possibility.
Which is?
That maybe these proposed renovations are a way to fix or maybe cover up the original construction flaws while the warranty is still active.
Using new money to fix old problems that should be covered anyway.
Potentially. The warranty seems to run until maybe September 2028, possibly even mid-2029, depending on the exact sign-off date.
That really raises questions about transparency, doesn't it? If there were known problems that the warranty should cover.
Using a whole new budget to fix them seems, well, problematic. And that article also gets into some very specific problem spots.
Right. Like what specifically?
Okay, so there are issues flagged with the parking garage design and construction. Apparently there's persistent water leakage on the B2 level.
Not good. Water leakage is never a minor thing.
No. Then there are the Salakio pavilions, reports of incorrectly sized stones, other construction flaws there too.
Incorrect stones?
Yeah. And then the Suramorkat, the Emerald Pool area, claims about possibly fake Dakianthong wood being used.
Fake wood.
Yep.
Seriously.
That's the claim. And again, issues with incorrect sizing of materials. It's quite a list.
It really is. For a building this new, this expensive, alleged fake materials, wrong sizes, leaks, collapsing ceilings.
It really paints a picture, doesn't it? Underscores the senator's points. Makes you wonder how it all got signed off initially.
Exactly. So with all these, let's call them red flags about the building itself, the costs, the original job,
Yeah.
maybe it's a good time to look at that second source.
The government handbook.
Yeah. The Handbook for Evaluating Outcomes and Controlling the Value of Projects. What's the main idea behind that?
Well, its core purpose, as stated, is basically to make sure government agencies spend public money wisely. Value for money, efficiency, transparency.
Standard good governance stuff.
Pretty much. It's supposed to align with the Constitution, serve the public interest, ensure taxpayer funds are used effectively, accountably.
Makes sense. So how does this handbook define value for money? What are they looking for?
Okay, so value for money, or kisn or money, according to the handbook, hinges on a few things. First, the quality has to be right for the intended purpose.
Fit for purpose. Got it.
Second, the price paid needs to be appropriate, justifiable.
Reasonable cost. Makes sense.
And third, there needs to be a clear, transparent plan for managing the materials involved.
Quality,
Uh,
cost, planning. Sounds straightforward. Does it say how they should actually do the projects?
oh, yeah. It really hammers home principles like transparency,
Transparency.
efficiency, and effectiveness. That kind of, kansanka, and auditability,
Auditability.
transparency.
So you need to be able to check the work and the spending.
Exactly. Across a whole process.
Yeah.
From buying stuff to managing assets.
Yeah.
Thinking about transparency, for instance.
Yeah.
You'd expect open bidding, clear documents
Right.
for that original $22 billion val project. But with the cost overruns and these allegations,
It suggests maybe that level of transparency wasn't quite there.
it certainly raises the question.
Okay, so transparency, efficiency, effectiveness, auditability all seem pretty crucial for public confidence. Anything else in the handbook that stood out?
Yeah, Article 21 is interesting. It says agencies should figure out the actual cost of their public services, like a unit cost,
Why?
so they can compare. If one agency's cost for something similar is way higher than another's, it flags a potential issue, maybe find ways to cut costs.
Like benchmarking almost. Proactive cost control. What else?
Article 22 gives a big role to the National Economic and Social Development Council and the Budget Bureau.
Okay, what do they do?
They have to jointly evaluate the value for money of government projects and report to the cabinet.
To decide whether to continue projects or not.
Exactly. And it affects future budgets too. Importantly, this evaluation isn't just about the money.
How so?
It explicitly includes non-quantifiable stuff like social benefits or even social downside.
Ah, so a wider view of value, not just the price tag. That seems sensible. What about how projects get started in the first place? Procurement.
Yep. Article 23 covers procurement principles. It stresses open and fair processes.
Fair bidding.
Right. And it says decisions shouldn't just be about the lowest price. You have to weigh up social impacts, public burden, quality, the project goals, and long-term benefits.
So looking beyond the immediate cost to the overall long-term value, that makes sense for big infrastructure, doesn't it?
Definitely. It specifically warns against only focusing on the lowest bid. There's also mentioned something called a logic model.
A logic model. Sounds technical.
It's basically a framework. Pop the light.
Mm-hmm.
It maps out how a project is supposed to work.
Wow.
It goes. Inputs like the money, resources, then activities, the work done, then outputs the immediate results like the finished building, then outcomes the effects on users, and finally, impact the bigger long-term consequences.
Okay, inputs, activities, outcomes, impact, like a chain reaction.
Pretty much. So for the Parliament building, the input was the huge $22 billion bad budget. The activity was construction.
But the output maybe wasn't quite right given the problems.
That's the question, isn't it? If the output, a functional, lasting building, has flaws, it directly affects the outcomes and the long-term impact of having a reliable government building.
Right. Useful framework. Does the handbook define those terms like efficiency and effectiveness too?
It does. Efficiency, about using resources well-being, processes, productivity.
Doing things right.
Kind of. Effectiveness is about achieving the goals, hitting targets, satisfying users.
Doing the right thing.
You could put it that way.
Oh.
And impact is the wider ripple effect, intended or unintended, on society, economy, environment, other agencies, the public.
Okay, efficiency, effectiveness, impact.
Agree.
Got it. And the handbook says how to measure these.
Yes, it gives guidance. For efficiency, look at things like cost per unit, output versus resources, actual time and cost versus plan, quality against standards, user satisfaction with the process.
Detailed stuff. What about effectiveness?
For effectiveness, you analyze cost effectiveness, how well the goals were actually met using numbers and qualitative feedback and user satisfaction with the benefits they got.
And impact. That sounds harder to measure.
It often is. Evaluating impact usually involves looking at the broader effects: public, economy, society, politics, environment, often more qualitative. And the handbook stresses using specific indicators. Cut us for all three.
Metrics to track success. Got it. I think you mentioned tables in there too.
Yeah, Table 2 is a template for summarizing these value for money evaluations, and Table 3 gives guidelines on how to fill it out. They basically prompt agencies to think through all these dimensions.
Sounds like a solid framework, on paper at least. Anything else notable?
Just quickly, it mentions project approval criteria has to align with the agency's mission and strategy and be feasible. And for projects where you can put numbers on costs and benefits, Appendix 3 lists financial tools like IRR, NPV, benefit cost ratio.
Standard financial analysis tools.
Okay.
Okay, so we've got the building problems, the renovation costs, and the government's own rule book on value. How do they connect? Or disconnect?
Yeah, that's the $1 million or 956 million by it question, isn't it?
Oh.
Well, straight away, a building needing major structural repairs after 4 years seems to clash directly with that handbook principle of quality fit for intended purpose.
Leaking walls and collapsing ceilings don't scream fit for purpose.
Not really. It suggests a failure in delivering basic value right from the start. And you have to ask, who was checking? Why wasn't this caught?
Absolutely. And then there's the cost, that proposed renovation budget. It forces you to ask if the initial $22 billion buy was properly evaluated for value for money.
Looking at it now, it's hard to argue as a successful outcome, value-wise.
And that cost-effectiveness point from the handbook.
Exactly. Were those initial billions justified by what we got? A building needing huge repairs so soon? Doesn't look very cost-effective right now.
Not really. And transparency, that principle the handbook emphasizes.
Well, with the allegations around the original project corruption, poor construction, and now this big renovation budget, it doesn't exactly build confidence in transparency, does it?
No. You wonder if the public is getting the full story.
The handbook calls for open bidding, clear documents. But the cost blowouts, construction delays reported initially, now this. It makes you question if those principles were followed all along.
And the impact on the public. All the spending.
That's another dimension the handbook says to consider. Spending almost another $1 billion bad to fix structural problems in a new building. People might see that as, well, a waste.
Diverting money from other things.
Potentially. And it definitely risks eroding public trust in how these massive projects are managed.
Okay, so wrapping this up, we've got this really expensive, quite new Parliament building.
Already facing serious structural issues.
Which leads to a huge proposed renovation budget.
And it throws a harsh spotlight back on the original construction quality. Raises big questions about accountability, especially with that warranty still supposedly active.
Right. And we have to view all of this through the lens of the government's own rules.
Yeah. Those principles in the handbook, quality, reasonable cost, transparency, efficiency, effectiveness, they seem seriously challenged by what's happening here.
So as we finish this deep dive, it really leaves you, the listener, with some big things to think about, doesn't it?
For sure.
Like, what are the wider implications when a project this big goes wrong so quickly? What does it mean for public trust?
And maybe what other questions should you be asking about how taxpayer money is spent on these major government projects and who's really overseeing them?